Hi, Super Thinkers. This is David, and today we're actually going to start drawing and designing our Colonial tool, device, machine, what have you, invention. It doesn't have to be a small tool that you could hold in your hand. So I wanted to talk about how we're going to do this and what resources you can use. Last time we talked about the materials that were available back then. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about what sorts of machines are useful. So at Portfolio, I feel like all of us learn about the six simple machines: the pulley, the lever, the wheel and axle, the wedge, the inclined plane, and the screw, and the ways in which they can help to give us some sort of what they call mechanical advantage, to make work easier so we can accomplish the same amount of work with less effort. One example of what the colonists used that was extremely successful was a watermill. So having essentially a system of gears and pulleys that were driven by a river flowing over a rotating wheel. And then this would cause gears to turn, and they could use it to grind corn, they could use it to cut logs, they could use it as a huge source of power. And the Dutch in particular were extremely famous for their windmills. So the windmills would be powered by the air, and they could use it to pump water. They could use it to drive really huge, massive wooden gear systems to accomplish a variety of tasks. So the problem that I'm trying to solve, and all of us are starting with the problem that Katie has given us, the problem that I am trying to solve is how to reduce the spread of disease in a colonial American city. Now, it's an issue we face right now, but it was an issue back then as well. Back then, the life expectancy wasn't as high. People wouldn't live as long. And one of the big reasons for that is that people were vulnerable to disease because they did not understand it. People didn't understand until about the year 1900, when it was accepted by doctors everywhere that microscopic germs would cause disease, and that basic sanitation, hand washing, and things like that were the best way to keep people alive. Before that, people in cities were particularly vulnerable because they lived close together. Often the sewage and their water source would be really close together, so their sewage could get into their drinking water. People would live right next to their farm animals and get diseases from their farm animals. And so, one example of a way that you can approach designing your project is to ask yourself, what could we do knowing what we know today, having the ideas that we have today, but only being able to use materials that existed back then to improve people's lives? So that's what I did. I decided people back then who often didn't bathe regularly, bathing was something you only did occasionally, uh, need to start bathing more, and they need to start washing their hands, particularly if a pandemic or epidemic of a disease like smallpox or malaria is spreading in an American city. And so I came up with some designs, and I'm going to go through the engineering process with you. I think you, just like I did, should go through different versions of your idea. Draw at least two or three different versions. So this was my first idea for a hand washing station. I know back then we don't have an elaborate system of pipes to carry water from upstate New York that is fresh the way that we do today. Right now, we get most of our water from the Catskills and other places that are hours north of us by car. So I knew back then people would need to get water, and if they wanted to, they could carry it up this ladder and put it into this barrel, and then a little valve would release water for people to wash their hands and therefore have less communicable diseases. I realized there's a couple problems with this. First of all, climbing a ladder carrying water is annoying and frustrating. And second of all, I don't know that this water people are using to wash their hands is actually clean because it's coming from New York City itself. It could be contaminated. So I invented a different sort of device. I went through several drawings, and this is what I came up with, which is a pot that can be put over a fire so that we can boil the water. And when you boil the water, you're certain you're killing all the germs. I can screw in a pump to the top of my pot and use a hand water pump of the kind that they had in colonial cities to dispense water for hand washing. And you can see here that I use several simple machines. My pump handle is a lever, and in order to attach my pump to my pot and detach it, I'm using a threaded screw, sort of like a jar lid. It has a built-in soap shelf. It has built-in chains so that you can hang it over a Colonial hearth and heat it up in a fire, because back then people would hang their pots over an open fire. We didn't have what we would call a stove yet. And it has some feet to stand on. It has a shelf to hold soap, because actually people back then had pretty decent soap. And I've labeled everything so that people know exactly what each part of my device is for. So what I would ask you guys to do is start out the way I did. Use a pencil, create a few different versions of your idea, and compare them. And if you need to, go back to the beginning, identify what could be better about your design, and then redraw it. And it's only when you're done sketching out a few different versions in pencil, go over it with a marker, make it look super neat, and label what everything is for. What we call this in design is a concept drawing. And a concept drawing isn't perfect. It doesn't have measurements. It doesn't tell you exactly how you would build something, but it's meant to explain to a viewer or to someone who might be purchasing this item why it works, why it's appealing. So imagine you have a client and you're presenting this to them. Try to make a drawing that is so engaging and so clear that they'd say, yes, I would like to pay money to purchase this item. So please do a drawing like that and share it with me. You may use email, you may use Seesaw, but make sure that you show me both a couple different versions where you tried different ideas and a final version where you drew it really, really well with markers and clear labeling of all your parts.